Ever look at a huge mountain range and just wonder, how? How does something that massive even get there? Well, it might seem super complex, but the basic idea, it's actually incredibly simple. And it all starts with an analogy you'll get right away. Okay, so this is the secret right here. Just picture it. You've got a rug on the floor and you start pushing it from one end. What's it gonna do? It's not just gonna slide perfectly across the room, right? Right. It bunches up, it crumples, it creates these little folds and ripples. Now, what's so wild is that our planet's crust does pretty much the exact same thing, just, on a scale that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And that simple idea is the key to the first way mountains get made. So let's jump right into it. First up, we've got what are called fold mountains. And this is basically that carpet analogy playing out for real. It's what happens when these huge pieces of the Earth's crust get pushed together and, well, they're forced to bend. So where does this push come from? Geologists have a term for it, a convergent boundary. The easiest way to think about it is that our planet's surface is like a giant jigsaw puzzle made of these enormous, slow-moving pieces called tectonic plates. And when two of those plates start moving towards each other, you get this incredible amount of pressure, just squeezing everything caught in the middle. And here's how that squeeze actually builds a mountain. First, you get all that pressure from the plates colliding, and it just squeezes these layers of rock. Now, you'd think the rock would just shatter, right? But deep down, with all that heat and pressure, it actually becomes kind of pliable. It bends. It creates these gigantic wave-like folds. And then there's nowhere for those folds to go but up. That's a process we call uplift, and boom, that's how you get a mountain range. And the most famous example of this? The Himalayas, the tallest mountains on the entire planet. They were created when the Indian plate slammed into the Eurasian plate. It's literally the Earth's crust crumpling up, just like that carpet we were talking about. Okay, so that's pushing and folding. But that's not the only way to make a mountain. Sometimes when two of these plates meet, one of them doesn't push back. Instead, it takes a dive. This whole process is called subduction. What's happening here is that one plate, usually a heavy, dense one from the ocean floor, slides underneath a lighter continental plate. It's this slow, incredibly powerful journey back down into the super hot center of the Earth. So you might be asking, what happens to that plate once it starts diving? Well, as it goes deeper, the heat and pressure get insane. They cause the rock to actually melt, turning it back into molten magma. And this magma, it's less dense than all the solid rock around it, so it wants to rise. It pushes its way up, up, up to the surface, and eventually it erupts. And each eruption adds another layer, building up over time to create volcanic mountains. And if you want a perfect real-world example, look no further than the Andes in South America. That whole mountain range is basically a long chain of volcanoes running right along the coast. And it's all there because the Nazca plate is subducting, diving, right under the South American plate. All right, so we've seen the crust bend and we've seen it melt. But what if it's too cold or brittle to do either of those things? Well, sometimes when you push on it, it just breaks. This is a process called faulting. So instead of folding up nicely like our carpet, the crust just fractures along these huge cracks, which we call faults. The analogy here is like trying to bend a cold, brittle piece of plastic. It's not going to flex, right? It's just going to snap. And how this works is pretty straightforward. The pressure builds and builds until, finally, crack. The crust breaks. And then huge blocks of rock get shoved upwards, while other blocks drop down along these faults. It's this dramatic up and down movement that creates these really distinct, steep-sided mountains we call block mountains. A classic example of this is the Sierra Nevada range out in California. That whole range is basically one gigantic block of the Earth's crust that got pushed way up along a fault line. It's what gives it that famous rugged look. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the 3 ways to build a mountain. You've got folding, where the crust bends and crumples. That gives you fold mountains. You have subduction, where one plate sinks and melts. That gives you volcanic mountains. And finally, you have faulting, where the crust breaks and shifts. And that gives you block mountains. See? 3 totally different actions, 3 totally different kinds of mountains. So we know how they're built, but that brings up a really big question. I mean, mountains seem so permanent, right? Like they're indestructible. But are they really? The short answer? Nope, not at all. Because as soon as a mountain starts to rise, a totally different force gets to work trying to tear it down. And that force is erosion. You can think of it like a great eraser, constantly working to wear down and reshape every single peak on Earth. And erosion's tools are things we see every day: wind, water, and ice. But they are relentless. Over millions and millions of years, they carve out valleys, they round off those sharp peaks, and they carry the mountain away, piece by tiny piece, slowly but surely bringing it back down to the lowlands and out to the sea. It's this constant, epic battle between the building up and the tearing down. So, when you boil it all down, the final takeaway is really simple. Mountains are made when the Earth's crust gets pushed into folds, when it gets subducted to make volcanoes, or when it's broken into blocks. That's it. It all comes down to those three simple actions. And maybe, in the end, the best way to think about it is just this: mountains are Earth's wrinkles. They're the beautiful, rugged proof that we live on a planet that is always moving, a planet that's always slowly compressing, breaking, and reshaping itself over millions and millions of years.